I feel like we should start doing the prayer after your jokes. I really do. Oh my goodness, y'all. That's And like I always tell y'all, I don't ever remember his jokes when I'm ready to tell somebody else one of them. But he said he remembered the one I told the other week, though. Yeah, I nothing but the best from Pastor, right? Yeah, right. All right. Tonight we're going to be in Matthew. I kind of want to share with you. Actually, I don't normally do this. 97, 98% of the time, probably more than that, when I preach or do a Bible study, it's the first time I've ever done it. But this week I'm double dipping, and I'll tell you why. I actually did this study yesterday morning to some missionaries and pastors out of Indonesia on an online group I did. And as I was preparing for tonight's Bible study, I was like, why don't I just present that? I was already ready to teach on it, so that's what I decided to do this week. So if you were in Indonesia yesterday morning, you may have already heard this, and maybe some of our online viewers, maybe you were there yesterday morning and you looked up the church, and if so, we're so glad you're here. But other than that, this would be a new Bible study to y'all tonight. We're going to talk about compassion, which I think is a really great pairing topic to gratitude and thanksgiving. I think the two are inseparably linked, compassion and thanksgiving. And tonight I want to kind of, as we talked about gratitude last Sunday, and we're going to talk about gratitude again this Sunday, I think it's great to have the meat in the middle of the sandwich of compassion. What is compassion? How would you define compassion? Let me tell you what the Baker Encyclopedia of the Bible says. Says compassion is the quality of showing kindness or favor, of being gracious, or of having pity or mercy. Kindness and favor, gracious, pity and mercy. Would you agree with that? Have any part to add to that? Any part of that anybody would object to? Compassion. Of course, there's a definition on paper, and then there's a real practical definition. That's what I want to know. I don't want to just know what something is. I want to know how to do it. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for the church? Am I obligated to participate in it? So some of these questions we could ask is, what does it mean to have compassion? Who are you and I supposed to be compassionate to? Are there any ones that we are not obligated to show compassion to? As church members and church leaders, how do we participate in the church showing compassion, both inward and outward? I will tell you this, Bethel is a very compassionate church, something I appreciate and love. When I came here 13 years ago, Bethel was a very compassionate church. That culture already was here at the time, and it has continued, for which I am immensely grateful for. Even though many of the membership has almost turned over several times, nonetheless, compassion has been handed down as a quality of this church, and it is a good quality. Well, as always, when it comes to these qualities like grace, mercy, love, compassion, the best definition is by looking at how Jesus did it. And that's what we're going to do tonight in Matthew chapter 9. Now, it's going to be our primary text, but we're going to be hopping around the New Testament some throughout the Gospels as we look at how Jesus ministered compassion. And I want to talk about the who, not the music group, the Who, but who do we show compassion to? Who is it that you and I are supposed to identify and say, that is somebody that I need to intentionally choose compassion in how I deal with them? Would you agree with me, though, that compassion is not always easy to show? I can give you some very good examples of some areas that I have struggled to find, keep, and demonstrate compassion. And I'm going to give you some of those examples tonight. I'm going to be a little honest with you guys. All right, Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 and 36 is where we're going to be, a pretty short text there. Matthew 9, 35, 36. Here we go. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And may the Lord bless the reading of his word tonight. It is a beautiful word. That sheep without a shepherd probably reminded of you of some Isaiah passages that we have read before. So a couple things about compassion before I get to 5 different groups of people that I think you and I are obligated or requested should show compassion to. But let me just talk about a few things here first of all. And I would say the same thing of love. I would say the same thing of grace, of mercy, and of gratitude. Compassion is not just a feeling. It's a defining trait of who the believer is. And as far as Jesus went, compassion was not just a feeling. It was a heartbeat of his ministry. Everywhere that Jesus went, compassion followed. Very few times in ministry did he show anything that didn't look like compassion. And when he did, it was because someone was taking advantage of someone else, and he was standing up for them, showing compassion by defending them. He showed compassion towards all kind of people, all kind of situations, and we're going to talk about some of those tonight. And so therefore, if we must reflect Christ, our hearts must widen like his did. You know, when I gave that illustration just a moment ago about, there's 1 or 2 times in Scripture that Jesus seemed not to show compassion. And you're probably thinking the same Scripture that I was thinking when I said it, when he went over and flipped over the tables. And how many times do people bring up the instance of Jesus flipping over the tables? When he only did it, we believe twice, perhaps once. Those times in Jesus' ministry were very few and far between. And why did he flip over tables? Because A, the house of the Lord was being tainted, compromised, violated, and B, innocent people seeking to worship God were being fleeced and taken advantage of. And so Jesus acted in accord with how God acts throughout the Scripture. That's another sermon. What I'm trying to tell you is the default for Jesus was compassion. The default was to show grace and love and mercy and pity and compassion. Everywhere he went, he showed compassion. So let's look at who Jesus showed compassion to. We're going to be in some other text as well, but I want to give you 5 points, and they all start with the letter H, if that helps you tonight, okay? First one is compassion is for the hurting, and we're going to be in Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1, verses 40 and 41. Compassion is for the hurting. Mark chapter 1, verses 40 and 41. And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, said to him, "If you will, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I will, be clean." So the leper represents the hurting. Now, this leper would not have been a part of the Matthew chapter 9 crowd, because in Israel, lepers were outcasts. They were the lowest caste of society, so to speak, lower than even outsiders and Samaritans and foreigners. The lepers were not allowed to be a part of any social activity. Even if a leper were to approach you on the road, they needed to yell out a verbal warning to you, lest you come too close to them and violate your own holiness or health. Of course, they would call out unclean. They were isolated. They were rejected, even by their family. They were, by necessity, kicked out. They were in a place of society where the only people they had as company were other lepers. And so misery loved company, for sure. People would have gone out of their way to avoid a leper. Definitely no touching. Definitely no getting near. Not even a question to it. Leprosy was considered not only a physical disease, but it also spiritual consequences in many cases. And in the Old Testament, there are some who did have leprosy as a result of spiritual actions or disobedience. But did you see in the text we just read that the leper dares to ask Jesus, "You can make me clean." But he did not ask Jesus to touch him. Nonetheless, he stretched out his hand and touched him. And then he said, "I will be clean." Jesus touched what other people avoided. Jesus touches what other people avoid. What people pity, Jesus will touch. What people are afraid of, Jesus will touch. He operates without fear. He's not concerned for his own safety. He's not concerned for the perception that other people may see him doing this and think he's violating the religious law of the time. What other people would have gone across the road and stayed on the other side of the road from, Jesus directly confronts and touches. I use this illustration not to bring positive attention to myself. That's not my heart. But to tell you probably maybe the closest I've been to a situation like this would have been, and some of you are aware of the circumstances, when the COVID strain was going around, that was the really deadly strain, and everybody was holed up in their homes pretty afraid. Some of you know that I received a communication from a family of a gentleman who was in the process of passing away in the local COVID ward at the hospital, and I offered and was accepted to go in there and visit him in full hazmat gear, mind you, and it was a very memorable experience, to say the least. I certainly had in mind I might not survive because of being in here, and that again, I'm not trying to impress you. That's not the purpose of this at all. I'm just trying to say I was in a situation where I kind of get the understanding of you want to stay away from that. Maybe you have been around some of that too. Maybe not in a physical sense, but maybe you've been around people that were cast out by society. Maybe you've been around people that other people avoid. Maybe back in school, you were the kid who sat by the person that no one else would sit by. Then you might know a thing or two about this particular act of compassion that Jesus shows. Whereas most people will stop when things encounter either poverty or pity or even being pathetic, Jesus didn't stop. He went right on. He kept ministering. He did not slow down. He did not flinch or hesitate. And he touched the leper. And what I want to suggest to you, that as Jesus did this, it's very difficult for us to minister to people that we refuse to touch. I'm not talking about a physical sense now. I'm talking about minister to, love them, show them the love of Jesus Christ. You can't minister to someone if you don't want to be around them. It's just not possible, okay? Compassion compels us to move toward pain, not away from it. Compassion is something that requires us to get in places of risk and of perhaps even personal discomfort, and yes, even safety. And it requires us to make contact with that which society might avoid. There are people within a 5-10 mile radius of this church who definitely qualify. They may not have leprosy, but they live in a spiritual leprosy of type. It may be that they have withdrawn from others because of maybe a record that they have, or maybe something they've done, or maybe in extreme poverty. Maybe they've been hurt and they are keeping it everybody's an arm's length. The Lord would have us minister to compassion to people who are hurting. And I mean, if you can't find anybody that's hurting out in the community, I mean, we can find them in the church easy. at any given Sunday, a third of our people are hurting real bad, either temporary circumstances or maybe something that's long-standing going on in their life. You and I are called to minister to the hurting. So that's the first group of people compassion is for. The second group of people that compassion is for the hungry. That's my second H word, the hungry. Now we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 14 for this text. Matthew chapter 14, to a very well-known story that really happened. And this is another one of those stories that some scholars say happened twice. We always think about this as the time that Jesus did this, but there's a very, very strong case to make it one of the times that Jesus did this. That is the feeding of the 5,000. Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 14 of that chapter. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over, and those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Now, for us to really understand this miracle, we got to really understand the setting, okay? This is AD 30-ish, not 2025. Have you guys ever gone to Tuscaloosa and you decided to go the straight route and not go through Montgomery and not go through Meridian, but go due north out of Mobile? You ever done that before? Okay, desolate, right? There's places you drive through there you do not want to break down during night. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. You got some stories, do you? There are places there you do not want to stop. Okay. That you just keep pushing right on through. And my wife, when we were dating, her family lived in Dixon's Mill, which was about 15 miles north of Thomasville. So we went up and down that highway all the time. That doesn't hold a candle to the desolation that we're talking about when the disciples said, "This is a desolate place." There was no McDonald's within driving distance. I mean, there was no driving or McDonald's, right? Nothing. There was no way to even acquire food except that it was prepared and to be sold into a village. I mean, this is 5,000 men plus women and children. Estimates of this crowd between 12 and 15,000 people. There wasn't a village big enough to feed them. So this was not a good suggestion by the disciples. Plus, it was evening. The sun was setting. It was dangerous for the crowd to disperse. There were wild animals in biblical Israel. Absolutely there were. The early range of the lion was very much in that area, and there were other animals there too. Plus, highwaymen, bandits, this was a thing. So there was real danger here to send a hungry crowd away. So Jesus knows this, and he has compassion for them. They're hungry, and he has compassion to meet their physical needs, and he says they need not go away. You give them something to eat. And what we see from this text, we can see a lot of things from this text but what we see from this text tonight is that physical needs matter to God. Maybe some of you have been in a children's VBS class or a Sunday school class, and you ask for a request, and a hand goes up and says something like, "My turtle died." And to an adult, can y'all imagine if one of y'all brought that prayer request on a Wednesday night? We would probably all say, is he playing a trick on us? But to a kid, this matters. And to Jesus, it does too. What matters to us matters to him. And hunger was a big issue that night. Jesus saw hunger. But here's what is really impressive about this, is that he did not see their hunger as an interruption, but he saw it as an invitation. He didn't see it as something that would disrupt ministry, but as something that would cause ministry to happen. Compassion meets spiritual and physical, practical needs. And you and I both know that sometimes people will not be agreeable to us or the church ministering to them until we have first proven to them our sincerity, meeting them where they're at, and often that takes place in physical needs. How often do I have opportunities to minister to people because of the work of the church that has gone before me? And I'll introduce myself. I'm Pastor Harvey from Bethel Baptist Church. And they'll say something like, oh, yeah, the church, they really did this. They really helped my mom's family when somebody passed away. They really, Walk Through Bethlehem means a lot to us. We go every year. And it will make them more open to hearing what I have to say and to sharing with them. Why? Because we have met physical needs of that family with compassion. Jesus fed the physically hungry, but this can affect any physical need is what we're talking about. When we feed those who are hungry in this life, like helping the poor, like taking care of the sick, we are preaching the gospel without words. Compassion is for the hungry. The third group, compassion is for the hopeless. Turn to Luke chapter 7, the hopeless. Luke chapter 7, another well-known passage. Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 11 of that chapter. Soon afterward, he went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, do not weep. Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. And he said, young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. The hopeless. As much as I described that last situation as a desolate place, now we can describe this as a hopeless situation. It's already incomprehensible, the loss that this woman has endured. There are some in here who have endured a similar loss of a parent having a child go before them. I can't say I know what that's like. It's a terrible thing to even contemplate. And in this day and age, it was further made difficult by the fact that her son would have been the one to take care of her in her older years. Therefore, not only had she lost a son, but she had lost stability. No Social Security, no insurance. Her son was effectively her livelihood. She had lost her future, her joy, and her wealth in one fell swoop. And so it appeared to this woman and to any wise, rational human being that this hope would not return. An irreversible decision, an irreversible action had happened here. You and I, sometimes we come to places that are devoid of hope. I'm reminded very distinctly of a previous ministry I was in which a young child had passed away, and showing up at that house, and one of the most hopelessly desperate situations I've ever been in. I mean, the passing of a child is bad under any circumstances. But I mean, we're talking about adults were in the front yard sick with grief, physically sick with grief. I mean, it was just hard to describe, and that's the feeling that I get here. They do not believe that there's anything left to live for. These hopeless situations. No hope for this world, no hope for the world to come. And there comes a time that sometimes people arrive in that we ourselves don't have anything to offer other than Jesus. There comes a time where a hug won't do, a casserole won't fill the soul, and a card won't bring joy. There comes a time that some people go through that only a miracle from Jesus, only what Jesus can do, will help a family, will help someone. You and I, in these instances, we become compassionate agents of his power that he uses to work through us to them. Times where we come may not be a person who has passed away, but it may be the loss of hope in another situation. Could be the loss of a career or a job. Could be the consequences of a terrible decision that has been made. Jesus' compassion does not stop when people lose hope. It keeps going. And we see here from the widow at Nain that he is able to restore hope. Not just about sympathy, but bringing hope into dark places. A fourth group of people that compassion is for the helpless. Now let's go back to our text, Matthew 9:36, the helpless. Matthew chapter 9, verse 36. We've already read it. We're going to read it one more time, if not more. Matthew 9:36, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Well, let's visualize the crowd together, shall we? First of all, most of you know this about your pastor. He is not overly fond of crowds. Most of y'all know that I am a person who probably does not like being in the middle of a party, and some of you share that sentiment with me. Some of you people are extroverts, and you are weird to me. I am not one of you. I am an introvert. I like quiet places. And so this was not a place that I probably would have enjoyed being in the middle of. People elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, all up in each other's space, clamoring to get closer to hear and see the great teacher. The smells would have been outrageous. The sounds would have assaulted my ears. Not enough room to even sit down unless you get out from the crowd, and then you can't hear him. And furthermore, this crowd not only would have lacked hygiene, but they would have lacked modern medical standards. So you look to your right, and somebody's got something. You got a good chance of bringing home as a parting gift with you. This crowd would have been a difficult place for someone to be, but not Jesus. He seemed to, even though he had to take breaks from crowds, he seemed to not be put off one bit when it came to ministering. Maybe what we would see most in the crowd is a crowd of sinners. But Jesus didn't even see that. He didn't see sinners. He saw sheep. Sheep. Now, sheep are not smart animals. And on their own, a sheep is quite vulnerable and helpless. A couple of years back, I preached a sermon, and it had sheep as one of the texts, and I showed the picture of the sheep in Australia. This is on the news. You can go home and look it up. Who somehow got away from his owners for a long, long period of time, did not get eaten, and he ended up, his life was in danger because he grew so much wool he could not even move anymore. And he was rescued under the weight of his own wool. You talking about being vulnerable. How many of you are so vulnerable to something that your hair becomes a danger to your life? That's sheep. Sheep, they are as bottom of the food chain as it gets. And that is what Jesus calls the crowd. What does he mean? It means that no one was protecting, no one was guiding, no one was looking out for their best interest. No one in government was making decisions that benefited them. They were on their own. And furthermore, they were mistreated, harassed, and helpless. By whom? By whoever would be the answer to that. certainly by government, but by the circumstances of life. These people were on their own until they met Jesus. And the point being is that compassion should move you and I to shepherd sheep. Pastor's not the only shepherd. I know that pastor sometimes is called an under shepherd, but we all can have a shepherding ministry over sheep, to teach, to guide, to protect, to introduce them to the great shepherd. The same people that Jesus would minister to, we must as well. Compassion is not just proven by our doctrinal knowledge or our church attendance, but also in our heart to shepherd other people. All right, finally tonight, let's see, what have my points been? Compassion's for the hurting, compassion's for the hungry, compassion's for the hopeless, compassion's for the helpless. All right, here's the fifth one. This is the most difficult one right here. Compassion is for the hard to love. The hard to love. And we're going to be in Luke chapter 19 for this final one. Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19, beginning in verse 41. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. The example for the hard to love for Jesus is the city of Jerusalem itself, because Jerusalem itself would reject him. We're talking about the city as a whole, its inhabitants as a whole. And I think that personally this is probably the most difficult group to show compassion to, those who reject us, those who push us away. Because if you're anything like me, I have a innate tendency to sometimes want to write people off after they push me away one too many times. And sometimes one too many times is once, right? I'm a human being, and I tend to struggle with this, and I have to pray about this. For different reasons, there was times that was difficult for me, and I had to pray, Lord, help me to keep and show compassion in the care of family members who had grown very aged and were passing away. And because of their condition, they were sometimes not nice, and I kind of had to turn around and say, okay, Lord, compassion, compassion, compassion. Fill me with compassion. I need compassion because I really want to show something else right now. Give me compassion. You know, I kind of struggled with that, if I may be real. And the Lord always answered that prayer. He did. He was so good, and he helped me. Jesus wept for Jerusalem. He wept for people that he knew in advance would reject him. He wanted the best for people who wanted the worst for him. That's amazing to me. Because when Jesus was making this lament about Jerusalem, he was making the lament about people who would be screaming, crucify him, crucify him. That's included in this verse. You know, it's easy to love someone who loves you, isn't it? It's easy for us to love people at Bethel because we identify with them. We have shared experiences. We have common desires. We've linked arms together in ministry. We have so many reasons that we love one another. But what about the guy from Baghdad that tried to hack my Facebook account the other night? Really did. A little bit more difficult, right? A little bit more difficult to have compassion on someone that does you wrong. But Jesus showed us that just because people reject him does not mean he ceased to show compassion. Probably one of the most profound things that ever came out of the mouth of Jesus Christ when he was walking upon this earth, he said upon the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's amazing. And the more I think about it, the more amazing it gets. Because too often we hear believers say a lot worse that are in a lot better of a situation. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We are supposed to have compassion for people who do not love us, people who do not agree with us, and people who reject us. Because compassion does not require agreement. It only requires love. Now, I'm not saying that we're doormat. I'm not saying that we should, let ourselves get beat up and throw ourselves at the mercy of people. That's ridiculous. And that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that Jesus found a way to minister to those who rejected him, and we should seek to do the same when we can. Because if we only love those who love us back, we've stopped being like Jesus. So we have to figure that out. Compassion is for the hurting, the hungry, the hopeless, the helpless, and the hard to love. Which one do you have a hardest time showing compassion to? My wife tells me that I am hard to love sometimes. The reason for that probably is that I'm hard to love sometimes. It is. Sometimes I just want to sit in a recliner with a book and not interact with anything or anyone. And I have to I have to snap out of it sometimes, because I go and I shut down. And so she says, you're being hard to love right now. So, okay, I'll get it. And she's very easy to love. She's I want to be more like her. I'm glad she's not more like me, that's for sure. Good heavens, that would be terrible. Compassion is for the hurting, the hungry, the hopeless, the helpless, the hard to love. Many of you showed compassion to these groups and to be committed for it, but it's always good for us to be reminded, for us to have the heart of Jesus Christ. And the heart of Jesus Christ extends to those who are harder to love as well. Ministry can be very messy. If we desire to minister to others, it's going to be messy. So the right approach to that is to roll up our sleeves and get in the mess and see what Christ can do. What about you guys? What are your thoughts about compassion? What are your thoughts about ministering with compassion? Anybody have anything they'd like to share? A time that it was difficult for you? Or yeah. And I remind you that compassion does not absolve consequences, okay? So what I'm not asking you is to, what I would never ask anybody is to give somebody a blank check of, yeah, it's okay, you can do whatever you want to me, I don't mind, I love you. That's obviously, no, I'm with you, brother. The time that I got home from church one time and I went straight inside because I had a 104-degree fever, not at this church, another church. I was so delirious and out of my mind, I left my car door open. And sure enough, I left my wallet in there, and some guy got it. And not only that, he stole Kira, who was a baby at the time, stole her diaper bag. Who steals a baby's diaper bag? Well, the answer was that guy right there did. No, we did allow that thing to be resolved in the legal system, but it also showed him compassion, and I was able to reach him later on because I treated him fairly. But yes, that did not remove the consequences from him. You're right. Anybody else? Yeah. And I think his life and his ministry is a good example of what you just said, because take my job, for instance. I could do nothing but visit people for my entire office hours every day, all day. I could. But in so doing, I would not do the other things that I've been called to do. Jesus could have done nothing but become a sideshow healing prophet. He could have done that. He had the power to do so. He had the desire to help people to do so. But he did not. He did not allow showing compassion to vulnerable people to allow him to be sidestepped from his true purpose, which was to bring spiritual reconciliation, not just physical healing. And so showing compassion is good, but showing compassion, I would never argue that needs to be done at the risk of, neglecting someone's kid or some other things that God has called us or have given us responsibility over. The church, this church right here, we get phone calls all the time, people asking for money. And the stories are really good, and many of them are true. But if we gave money to every person who called here, a couple things would happen. Number one, we would have no money left. Number two, you wouldn't want to give to the church anymore because you are giving to fund the work of the gospel, not just a benevolence ministry, okay? So we have to have protection and boundaries in place even as a church organization. And it's not that we don't love, and it's not that we're operating without compassion, but it's that we're operating with responsible compassion. And there's a whole case there, yeah.
And they could be calling every church.
Oh, they are. Oh, no, in many cases, they do, yeah. Not all of them. One of our first questions we ask when somebody calls us is, where are you calling us from? And if it's from any place that is not Elsinore, Roslynton, Robertsville, Loxley, then we suggest you call the churches in your community. So yeah, that is the first thing. But generally speaking, we have several other questions as well that we ask that qualify our help. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about compassion? Showing it, receiving it? Sometimes it's harder to receive it than show it, isn't it? We've got this little thing called pride. We don't like to get help sometimes, but sometimes the Lord would have us receive compassion. That's hard. I don't like receiving it. All right, well, this coming Sunday is Gratitude Part 2. Last week we talked about gratitude in the valley during tough times. This week we're going to talk about gratitude on the mountain during great times, during triumph. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that sometimes thanking God on the mountain is even harder than thanking God in the valley. And that's what we're going to talk about, living a life of thanksgiving when things are going relatively well. It's more challenging than sometimes we want to admit it is. So that's what we're going to talk about this Sunday. All right, let's pray. We're going to be dismissed. Thank you all for being here tonight. As we pray, I'm going to walk to the sound room so I can turn the live stream off at the conclusion of the prayer, and I look forward to seeing you guys here Sunday or sooner. Lord, as we leave this place today, help us to go show compassion as you would have us to show it to those that we would encounter, Lord. And I know, Father, there's so many things that make compassion a case-by-case sort of thing. But Lord, help us to responsibly act as you would act and speak as you would speak and give as you would give in a way that builds your kingdom and brings love to those who need it.